and welcome to the Nest Climate Systems Hub webinar, Behind the World's Climate Report, Insider Perspectives from the IPCC. My name is Heidi Evans, and I'm a knowledge broker with the Climate Systems Hub. As the New South Wales knowledge broker, my role sits in the New South Wales Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water. That's for New South Wales DQ, not the federal one. Today, we're delving a bit deeper into all that is the IPCC. So that's the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. We're midway through the 7th assessment cycle. So what better time to have all your niggling questions about the assessment, the report, and the processes behind the scenes answered. To help us peel back those layers, we've got a fantastic selection of expert speakers with us, who I will introduce shortly. But before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the Wongal people of the Eora Nation, who are the traditional custodians of the lands here where I'm joining you from in Sydney today. I pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and I'd like to extend my respect to all First Nations people joining us today. The Climate Systems Hub recognises the important role traditional knowledge plays in understanding our climate. We know you're all dialing in from across Australia and elsewhere. Please take a moment to think about the traditional owners of the lands where you're joining from. So, if this is your first Climate Systems Hub webinar, a big welcome to you. These webinars are designed to provide an opportunity for learning and interaction with a broad range of topics and experts. There's some great presentations lined up for the rest of the year, and we'll let you know at the end how to make sure you don't miss out on any of them. So just some quick housekeeping and an explanation of how we're going to run things today. The webinar is being recorded and the link will be made available on the Nest Climate Systems Hub website in the coming days. So today's session is a discussion panel. So unlike our usual pattern for these webinars, there's very little in the way of formal presentations. Instead, our panel members will have a few minutes to introduce themselves, explain their involvement with the IPCC, and then we'll move straight into the Q&A and discussion. So on that note, we strongly encourage you to ask questions. This can be done at any time. You'll see in the top bar of your screen the Q&A function. So jump in there and type in your question. And also note that you can vote for questions that you see other people have put in there that you too would like answered. We'll try and get through as many as we can. However, we may not make it through all of them. So definitely get in early. Okay, that's probably enough from me. So without any further delay, I'd like to warmly welcome our panel members. So joining us, we have Sean Hart, an Assistant Director at the Federal Department of Climate Change, Energy, the Environment and Water, and Australia's Secretariat to the IPCC. Dr. Pep Canadell, Chief Research Scientist in CSIRO Environment, Chief Lead Investigator in the Climate Systems Hub, and lead of the Hub's Global Carbon Budgets and the Role of Terrestrial Carbon Sinks project, and Executive Director of the Global Carbon Project. We have Dr. Pandora Hope, Principal Research Scientist at the Bureau of Meteorology and lead of the Hub project Projection Verification. Dr. Thilo Zine, Team Leader of the Land Surface and Ocean Biogeochemistry team in the Modelling the Earth System group at CSIRO, and Project Lead for the Hub project Access Development and Delivery to CMIP7. And you may have noticed in our webinar promotion and on our opening slide, the name Damien Morgan-Bould. Damien is a proud Yorta Yorta man and the Hub's Senior Indigenous Facilitator. Unfortunately, Damien is in transit at this point in time and isn't able to join us. However, some of the other panel members are going to give a few insights into the project that Damien is leading at the moment with the Climate Systems Hub. It's called Indigenous Literature and Products to Inform National and International Processes on Climate Action. All right, so that's our panel members. To get us started, I'm going to hand over to Sean for a little bit of scene setting. So he'll tell us about his role as Australia's secretariat to the IPCC, what that entails, and the nature of Australia's involvement. So it's over to you, Sean.
Thank you, Heidi. So good afternoon. My name is Sean Hart. I work in the Australian Government in DQ. I support Australia's engagement with the IPCC. So to give some sense of the enormous international collaborative effort undertaken by the IPCC each cycle, I've included a photo on this slide of the stack of reports produced during the last completed cycle of the IPCC. This is the sixth cycle, which ran from 2015 to 2023. These reports are made up of over 10,000 pages. They were authored by 721 selected authors from over 90 countries, and they generated over 200,000 comments from experts and governments during the review stages that were required to be actioned by the authors. Today, I'm going to provide some insights into what this enormous undertaking each cycle and how we end up with the IPCC reports every 6 to 7 years. Firstly, I'll give an overview of what the IPCC is for some context. Secondly, outline some of the key stages in report production for us and give some insights into our role as focal point. Thirdly, I'll mention how you can get involved in the work of the IPCC, noting we are now moving into the middle of the 7th assessment cycle, which is expected to run until 2030. Firstly, though, I'll provide an overview of what the IPCC is to give some context. The IPCC was established jointly by the United Nations Environment Programme, UNEP, and the World Meteorological Organization in 1988. It is a leading international body of the United Nations responsible for assessing the science of climate change. The IPCC is made up of over 190 member countries, with every member country nominating a national focal point that acts as the central point for the country to engage. Our national focal point is Alana Pentony, branch head of National Inventory Systems and International Reporting within DQ. I support Alana by leading a program of work targeted at coordinating and enhancing Australia's engagement with the IPCC. On the next slide, I've extracted two key principles of the IPCC that I'd like to highlight. Oh, sorry, the same. Back on the last slide, Tanya. So firstly, the IPCC's mandated role. This is to assess on a comprehensive, objective, open and transparent basis the scientific, technical and socio-economic information relevant to understanding the scientific basis of risk of human-induced climate change, its potential impacts and options for adaptation and mitigation. So key to highlight here is that it's a broad assessment across climate change and that the IPCC does not do its own research, but rather it assesses the existing science. Secondly, IPCC reports should be neutral with respect to policy, although they may need to deal objectively with scientific, technical, and socio-economic factors relevant to the application of policies. This has been key to maintaining integrity for ensuring scientific objectivity and also to maintaining the science policy boundary. The structure of the IPCC is quite complex, and most that engage with it do so from one side, either the government side or the scientist side. Broadly, the structure and the principles of the IPCC seek to strike a balance between the roles of governments and scientists to ensure the science is owned by governments and able to inform international climate action, including through the UNFCCC, while maintaining the integrity of the science. The graphic on the next slide provides an overview of the main components of the IPCC. On the left is largely the government side, and this is where the governance and decisions are made, largely through the IPCC plenary, where all governments come together to meet. There are also responsibilities that fall to the IPCC Bureau, which consists of independent scientific members elected by governments. On the right is the scientists and expert side, and you will get insights into this side through our climate scientists speaking today about their experiences. They are or have been some of the hundreds of authors that are selected by the IPCC Bureau to independently draft the chapters of the reports each cycle. In the middle is the working groups of the IPCC. So there are 4 working groups. Working Group 1 focuses on assessment of the physical climate science. Working Group 2 focuses on assessment of the impacts, adaptation and vulnerabilities. Working Group 3 focuses on mitigation. And the fourth group, and possibly the less well-known of the IPCC's groups, is the Task Force for National Greenhouse Gas Inventories, or TFI. The TFI develops methodologies for governments to use to report their national greenhouse gas emissions and removals. So the working groups and task force and the TFI are each supported by technical support units. These are small teams of around 10 people who are situated in the country of the elected co-chairs who sit within the scientific bureau and lead the groups. The IPCC is supported by the secretariat, who oversees the process and provides the support for the IPCC to operate. They are situated within WMO headquarters in Switzerland. Our role as national focal point to the IPCC includes several broad functions as outlined on the next slide. To help illustrate these and where they fit within the IPCC cycle, I've included in the graphic on the right-hand panel that shows the report production process that operates each cycle. Firstly, we participate as Australian delegates in the Intergovernmental Plenary sessions. Here we advocate for Australia's positions and priorities in the IPCC and navigate the interests of other countries to come to consensus decisions. The key plenary for report development, circled in green at the start of the cycle, is where the scope of the reports is approved. This then allows for author selection to take place and work to commence on drafting the report. Towards the end of the cycle, also circled in green, the plenary meets to have the final say on the summary of the IPCC report. Here it formally approves the summary for policymakers, known as the SPM, line by line in dialogue with some of the authors. The plenary's approval process guarantees that governments from all around the world review, understand, and ultimately own the scientific findings while maintaining the integrity of the science in the underlying report that informs the SPM. IPCC plenaries also where elections to appoint the independent scientific bureau members are made and where decisions on governance matters such as the IPCC budget are also made. Another key activity for us, circled in blue here, is coordinating the IPCC's call for nominations. So once a decision is made to approve the scope of an outline of an IPCC report, as focal point, we receive calls from the IPCC to nominate authors. We distribute these calls to our stakeholder list, which consists of those who have registered interests and share suitable nominations we receive with the Bureau. We encourage anyone who is interested in joining our contact list for future opportunities to reach out to us by email, and we'll drop this in the chat today. Once we put forward nominations, the IPCC becomes responsible for selecting author teams for each chapter. To select the authors, the IPCC considers expertise, geographical balance, and diversity of the author team. The next key part of our role is coordinating government reviews of each IPCC report within the two government review stages, circled in black on the slide. This is an important stage for checking the accuracy, clarity, and particularly the policy relevance of the reports before they are finalised. We share the reports across different relevant departments and different levels of government. We then compile these and provide them as a consolidated submission on behalf of the Australian government and to the IPCC authors for their consideration. I also wanted to highlight a couple of key priorities for this cycle and work we are doing to support them. So firstly, we are committed to elevating First Nations voices within the IPCC and inclusion of their Indigenous knowledges. We've heard from First Nations people that they want their voices, the reality of what they are seeing on country, and their solutions included in the IPCC's global assessment, and are pursuing a number of initiatives here. The project led by Damien Morgan, the Indigenous facilitator of the Climate Systems Hub, is contributing to addressing the underrepresentation of Indigenous voices and knowledges here. And we're very appreciative of Damien and the Climate Systems Hub in delivering this work and the communities involved for sharing their knowledge through the project. So just a bit of background on the project. The project is an Indigenous-led literature and aimed at producing Indigenous-led literature and products to inform national and international processes on climate action, including the IPCC. It's doing several on-country case studies, including on several climate extremes, including coastal impacts, extreme heat, fire in country, big wet and big dry, and also case studies on youth and governance. The project's grounded in free, prior and informed consent and protection of Indigenous cultural and intellectual property. It is guided by the First Peoples Platform on Climate Change and built on the Hub's long-standing partnerships with the traditional owners. Secondly, we're working closely with the Pacific and the IPCC and have been working with them to increase their capacity to engage over recent years. This work has included supporting co-publishing of key climate literature with Australian researchers on key topics in time for inclusion in the 7th cycle reports. Lastly, towards the end of the cycle, we play a role in briefing across government on the findings of the IPCC and supporting communication of the IPCC findings with policymakers. On the next slide, I wanted to briefly go over what opportunities there are to get involved. Firstly, you can nominate as an author through us when we send out calls for nominations. There are a variety of author roles, and each chapter has its own team of authors. Typically, 2 or more coordinating lead authors lead the work of the chapter and are supported by a small team of around 6 to a dozen authors. While author selection for this cycle's reports has been completed, there are other ways to get involved in this 7th cycle. This includes registering with the IPCC to be an expert reviewer for any of the 7 reports which will make up this 7th cycle. Over the next 2 years, we will see the 7th assessment reports be released in stages for review. We currently have the special report on climate change in cities out for review now, and this will be the first report of the cycle with a scheduled release in early 2027. We also have 2 methodology reports from the TFI. The first will look at guidance on short-lived climate forces, and the second on carbon dioxide removal technologies, and both are due to be approved in the second half of 2027. Following this, we will have the 3 working group reports, and then the cycle will be wrapped up by a synthesis report due in late 2029. You can look out for these opportunities to become an expert reviewer by looking at the IPCC website and following their social media to find out. Finally, researchers and experts can contribute their research for inclusion in the assessment reports. The IPCC reports can only assess the science that is out there and is dependent on the thousands of climate researchers, including those working at the Climate Systems Hub. So I'd like to thank the Climate Systems Hub for the opportunity to provide you with an overview of the enormous international collaborative effort that goes into producing that stack of IPCC reports each cycle, and giving you an overview of the IPCC, the key stages and role for us as the focal point to the IPCC, and how you can get involved if you wish to. Please reach out to us via email, and we will drop the email into the chat if you're interested in being placed on our contact list or have any questions. I'll now pass back to Heidi. Thank you, Heidi.
Thanks, Sean. That was, really interesting. A lot of detail in there that I think most people probably wouldn't be aware of, and some really good context for our discussion today. Okay, so now each of the remaining panel members are just going to take a few minutes to explain their involvement with the IPCC. So Dr. Pep Cannadell, we're going to start with you.
Thanks, Heidi. Look, I've been very privileged to be able to work with the IPCC for 4 cycles and the current cycle as well. So that's more than 20 years. And you've seen from Sean that there's all these critical levels of contributions, from contributing author to lead author to coordinating lead author. Every time you have more and more responsibility until you are the one that are accountable for releasing a really good chapter at the end. So I've been privileged of being able to do all of these roles over the last 20 plus years. And I'm currently in this AR7, just a contributing author. I didn't want to play much of a big role, but I've been asked just to contribute to some of the kind of carbon biochemistry, carbon climate feedbacks for chapter 4, and then chapter 9 on Earth system responses under climate stabilization and overshoot. So I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thanks, Pep. Okay, Dr. Pandora Hope, over to you.
Thanks, Heidi. I was a lead author of Chapter 1, the Framing Context and Methods, and the Technical Report of Working Group 1 in the last assessment cycle. So not quite as long as Pep. And as a first time in the process, it was amazing the things that I learnt. One thing was about the process, and another was around the fact that the most recent assessment builds on all the other assessments. So if you like Pep, you know it all. But for me, I had a lot of revision to do to go back and read all those earlier reports, which was really interesting to do. And certainly the chance to meet so many of my professional idols and colleagues all in one place was just amazing. For me, my key focus was on how the climate change has altered our climate, the influence on temperature trends and extremes, and our confidence in the human signal. And I was also working with Working Group 2 and 3 authors to understand their attribution approaches, including describing how climate change influences, for example, animal communities, or how policy influences atmospheric composition, like the Montreal Protocol, and the recovery of ozone hole. Just amazing. And in chapter 1, we also, another one of my roles was to describe the gaps. One was around CMIP, often lagging behind IPCC, and the lack of Indigenous and local knowledges in the reports. But I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Pandora. Yeah, already some really good insight. Over to you, Dr. Thilo Zine.
Sorry, just trying to unmute yourself. Thanks, Heidi. I'm Thilo Zine, and I'm a lead author for the next IPCC assessment report, AR7, Working Group 1, which provides the physical science basis, and I'm contributing to Chapter 5, which covers scenarios and projected future global temperatures. This is quite a complex chapter, introducing the models and tools we use for the assessment of scenarios, but also describing the scenarios itself that are used in the report. So scenarios are basically different possible futures that explore how the climate might change depending on how society develops and how our emissions change in the future. The chapter also explores the global temperature response to those scenarios, including important climate indicators or climate sensitivity metrics and carbon budgets. For me, this is the first involvement with the IPCC. And for those of us that are new, the whole process, and particularly the tight timelines, can be quite overwhelming and daunting. There is a vast amount of information that we need to be aware of and understand. But having said that, the IPCC provides a lot of support through regular information sessions, webinars, and discussions. But overall, the time commitment required is considerable. And there are times when it feels like it's really just taking over your whole life. So each chapter, including our chapter, is led by 3 coordinating lead authors, and most of them have been involved in the IPCC process before, and they are overseeing the entire chapter, including any interactions and links with other chapters and working groups. And as a lead author, I'm responsible for drafting and assessing specific sections within the chapter, and that pretty much aligns with the expertise that individual lead authors have. So lead authors evaluate the literature, they contribute to figures and the text, and they also contribute to the frequently asked questions, which provide a plain language summary or explanation for the general public. And we are currently working on the so-called first order draft for AR7. So this is the first full draft for each chapter, which is then also being released for formal review. So it's sent to expert reviewers worldwide for comments and feedback. And then we need to respond to each and every comment. And the first order draft is due very soon on the 17th of July. So that's only 1 month away from now. So I'll leave it there.
Scary times for you, Thilo. Thank you. Yeah, again, yeah, some really interesting kind of behind the scenes look at what the work involved is. Okay, and already amazing to see the representation our hub scientists have in the work of the IPCC. So now that we know what everyone's doing here, we're going to move into the discussion and Q&A section of the webinar. Please keep your questions in. It's great to see some in there already. You can ask them to the panel as a whole or to Sean, Thilo, Pep and Pandora individually, however you see fit. Now, I'll confess, just to kick off and just to warm up our panel members, and we do have a few, just a handful of pre-prepared questions, so I'm going to start there. Okay, so Pandora, Thilo just touched on this a little bit, but lead author for a chapter. What is the lead author responsible for, and what does day-to-day in practice look like for you?
As you said, Tilo covered most of it. Certainly in my chapter team, we had 14 authors and 3 coordinating lead authors. For them, a lot of the work was actually the people side of things sometimes, once we got the science underway. But getting that organised was actually a big step. And I'm sure Tilo's, experiencing that right now, actually deciding what's in, what's out, following the scoping that we set up at the meeting in December 2024, where we decided what should be included this time round. And as Tilo said, we were responsible for various parts of the chapter, and for many people in other chapters, that's often in their area of expertise. But in chapter 1 or some of the more overview chapters, that can be anything. And then, of course, review and re-review. One of the interesting things that came up through my involvement was, aside from kind of running these discussion groups for attribution or reanalyses from across the different chapters and also across the working groups, things came up during the writing process, like the pandemic. So we were then asking questions about what influence does the pandemic have on our observing network, for instance, and then trying to scramble to find people that knew anything about that. And there were some reports from the World Meteorological Organization and some people actually in my department who knew about some of these things, but finding contributing authors on specific topics was a big job for the authors as well. And as I said, I was also involved in trying to come to terms with some of the gaps and learnings across not just chapter 1, but already across all the different chapters, and really learnt that the rate of increase in the volume of literature on climate change, which is doubling in output every 5 to 6 years, was a huge factor for us. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Heidi.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. That's a really good picture of some of the challenges you encountered. So Pep, I'm going to turn to you. You have had an incredibly broad range of experience in the IPCC assessment work across your career so far. Sean spoke about this briefly, but can you tell us a bit about the governance structures behind the IPCC? Like who runs this thing, and what does that mean for global trust and credibility?
Yeah, so Sean has actually really kind of articulated, who is who, and it's a complex thing. And I think that I just want to highlight that this interaction between policy/governments and science, it is one of the most carefully crafted relationships that exist in the world. There's no other issue which has been dealt at the international level, which requires the science at the center stage, that it has developed such a comprehensive, careful, process and assessment, and now running for more than 30 years. So I think that's the first thing. But I think it's worth to say that when we are just on the road, doing the assessment, the assessment is really run by the scientists. And that's very important because, over the years, we heard all sorts of things about IPCC. Oh, IPCC is the government, how can it be any good? IPCC is a UN process, how can this thing be good? Everyone is trying to manipulate anything. But there's no manipulation, Once we have agreed on what we need to, discuss, once we have agreed, governments have said we need all this information, then science go. Sean talked about the TSU, we have these technical support units, which are run by scientists, which they keep in place and very straight into the deadlines, all these hundreds of authors and thousands of contributing authors that are contributing. So it is really, I just want to emphasize this thing that when, people say, oh, the IPCC is too moderate. IPCC is just, maybe it's manipulated. People talk about the approval at the end where governments, they're trying to change the message. it's not true. They may want to say, well, we need you guys to say these additional things, not the content of the things, but we need to hear at the highest level of the summary policy level some of these components, which are very important to us. Or you have explained this thing that governments cannot understand and needs to change. But scientists are 100% in control of the scientific content, and there's no mucking around with it. And I think that's very important, that people understand that this is really the state of the science by the global scientific community. So yeah, I think that just probably I'll stop here, but just to, there's always a lot of discussion and where this thing is good enough, but we'll see through today's discussions, how careful the whole system and the whole assessment is.
Yeah, thanks, Pep. It is a pretty massive global collaborative effort. Yeah, when you look at it. Thanks for that insight. So Thilo, first timer with the IPCC. So noting that you're going to be writing about the overview of the models used in climate projection scenarios, do you want to tell us a little bit about the relationship between the CMIP cycles and the IPCC assessment cycles? Some of the challenges, maybe?
Thanks, Heidi. That's actually quite an important point that you raise here. So the CMIP cycles and the IPCC assessment cycles are closely linked, but they're not the same. So CMIP stands for Coupled Model Intercomparison Project, which is a community-led modeling effort that produces coordinated climate model simulations under a common set of experiments and scenarios. And the IPCC then draws on those CMIP outputs as a primary evidence base for the assessment. And in practice, each IPCC assessment aligns closely with a particular CMIP phase. So for example, the previous assessment report, AR6, relied heavily on CMIP 6. And the upcoming AR7 report aligns closely with CMIP 7, although this relationship isn't always perfectly synchronized. So CMIP runs ahead of the assessment to generate the simulations, while the IPCC's role is to assess, synthesize, and compare results across models, alongside observations and other evidence as well. So in short, CMIP underpins the IPCC assessment reports by providing the coordinated multi-model simulations.
Yeah, thanks, Thilo. That was something that I'd been playing in my mind about how they connected. So yeah, that was really a really good, helpful explanation. Sean, over to you. You mentioned the support that DQ, your Department of Climate Change and Energy, the Environment and Water, has provided for the Hub project that Damien is leading, and that First Nations perspectives and representation is a key focus for you in your role. How has this been handled in the past, and have you got any insight into why Indigenous inclusion is kind of getting this traction for the 7th assessment report?
Thanks, Heidi, for the question. So previous cycles have considered the impact of climate change more on Indigenous peoples and communities, and we saw that in the Australasia chapter last cycle. But there's been a lack of Indigenous authors themselves involved as lead authors, and a lack of Indigenous knowledge and recognition of the value of Indigenous knowledges and solutions to climate change. Last cycle, we had, at the end of the cycle, we had a number of the Australian AR6 authors approach us and worked on a report with Indigenous contributing authors and Indigenous researchers, and they provided that report to us that on a number of recommendations about how they wanted, and it was underpinned by a survey from Indigenous communities themselves that wanted their voices heard in the international global climate change assessments of the IPCC. So I think why it's sort of ramped up, I think over the cycles, the exclusion of Indigenous knowledges has become increasingly glaring. And I think some might see it both as a fairness issue, but it also goes deeper in that of the IPCC's reputation as risk if we're not including other knowledge sources and the value that they have clearly demonstrated over over time to helping to act on climate change, including in Australia and overseas. So I think there's a number of things happening this cycle, and that including the project that's led by Damien, that's really important to us, and having them work with Indigenous communities and having it grounded in free, prior and informed consent and protection of their Indigenous cultural intellectual property coming through in the reports. There's also been a lot of advocacy both in Australia and elsewhere. We work with countries like Canada and New Zealand and the Pacific and their traditional knowledge to make sure that we've been elevating this progressively over time. And there's also a number of initiatives involved underway in the IPCC itself to sort of provide ethical guidance to authors about how to include Indigenous knowledges. So there's a few things happening, and it's hopefully we see some real good progress in this cycle. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. That was really good background context. And I'm just going to hand over to Pep. I know that you have been involved in the project. Do you want to just give like a brief description of the case study that you're working on and how you've been helping with that?
Yeah, so one of the focus is cultural burning, and there's multiple aspects. One is the purely Indigenous-led, research that we're focusing on a few regions of kind of Queensland, Eastern Queensland areas where there's a lot of cultural burning from different communities, and that's kind of leading now to kind of organizing the information and packaging into what will be a peer-reviewed paper manuscript, being submitted. But then we also want to do something else, and that is not just the Indigenous component, but how we can actually bring Indigenous knowledge along with some Western world science. And that's where I just come in a little more importantly. And we're just trying to bring together a major review of scientific published literature, looking at the impacts of cultural burning on biodiversity, water resources, ecosystem structure. It's kind of the all the people who have spent many years doing analysis, kind of more quantitative, using Western world science to evaluate, those impacts or impacts, not negative, just benefits of cultural burning. That's above and beyond, of course, all the value that cultural burning has, for the Indigenous communities. So it's a kind of a nice mix of both 100% Indigenous-led, and then trying to look for sweet spots to bring together the kind of Western world science and Indigenous together in a piece of science that will end up on its own in a research paper being submitted to a journal, all for being available for this IPCC assessment.
Yeah, that's the point, right? It needs to be published. It needs to be, yeah. Thanks for giving some detail on what you're doing there. It sounds like it's a fantastic project. I'm gonna do one more, I think. Tilo, this one's for you. So one of the major pieces of work you're doing in your everyday role is developing Australia's own global climate model, known as ACCESS, that is capitals ACCESS. How does that work feed into the contribution you'll be making to the IPCC assessment? And I guess, how does this compare to other nations who have global climate models? So, what are the benefits to Australia of having our model as part of this important kind of global process? Long question.
Thanks, Heidi. Well, that's more than one question. It's at least 3 questions. And just to clarify, there's a whole team working on the development of ACCESS with strong collaborations across the whole community. So in terms of how our work feeds into the process, there is an almost direct link between the ACCESS work, ACCESS, our climate and Earth system model developed in Australia, which is supported by the NESP Climate Systems Hub, and the link to the IPCC assessments. By developing and running Australia's own climate and Earth system model, we contribute simulations and scientific understanding to the international model intercomparison effort, such as the Coupled Model Intercomparison Project, CMIP, and CMIP, as we discussed earlier, underpins the IPCC assessment. So that means that Australia is not just a user of global data, but we are also actively contributing to generating and evaluating the evidence-based that the IPCC relies on. And it's also worth noting that Australia has contributed to all coupled model intercomparison projects so far, and is currently submitting simulation results to CMIP7 with the Access Earth System model to support the upcoming IPCC assessment report AR7. How does that compare to other nations? Well, in general, countries who have their own climate and Earth system model can directly test assumptions. They can run their own scenarios. They can explore uncertainties independently of what's available elsewhere. So this is really around sovereign capability, which I guess in the current global environment becomes more and more of an important aspect to consider. Countries that don't have their own global model have to rely entirely on data and projections generated elsewhere, and there are certain risks to that as well. And also, in order to provide a robust assessment, the IPCC really relies on contributions from many different models, because each model is unique and it represents different processes or processes in a different way, and also depending on what each country's priorities are. So by taking all of this into account, we can provide a range of likely results and not just a single number. And I think your last question was around benefits to Australia. So the access model, although it is a global model, it's tailored to what Australia, needs. It is recognized as one of the best performing models over the Southern Ocean, and it includes processes and representations relevant to our region and the Southern Hemisphere that other models don't have. And I think Australia needs this capability to be able to respond to increasing climate risks, such as extreme heat, floods, droughts, fires, and so on. So our Australian Earth system model is not just underpinning international efforts such as the IPCC, it's also supporting national mitigation, adaptation, and resilience planning, carbon accounting, assessment of net zero pathways, and evaluation of nature-based solutions, and so on. So with this sovereign modeling capability, we also ensure that Australia remains a credible contributing partner in the global climate science community. Yeah, we'll leave it here.
Yeah, that was great, Thilo. Yeah, really important. Yeah, a really important resource for us as a nation. I think it'd be great to touch a bit on the peer review process. And yeah, we're going to move into the audience questions now. And somebody, none of these are specific to any one of you, so feel free to jump in. But the question is, yeah, how do you resolve conflicting views among the contributing authors? So that's the question, but it'd be great if, I don't know, we could touch a little bit on what the, like Thilo mentioned, the commenting, you know, your report gets distributed for comments, and then you have to address each of those. So yeah, just a little bit of detail on that kind of review process would be great. Pandora, you haven't spoken for a while, so let's start with you.
Yeah, so certainly starting right at the beginning, people can, you know, offer their opinions on what's in, what's out, and that's really a big role for the coordinating lead author. Like, they do have the final say, as Pep was saying, you know, he's in charge when he was a coordinating lead author. But then as the reviews come in, for the most part, they're pretty obvious, because we have the supporting science that we're assessing. So there's not usually huge conflict. For us in our chapter team, some of the conflict was around the the way we might demonstrate certain features in the graphics and things like this that were often just resolved through working through what looked great with the support units that we have in the IPCC. And we, like, the technical support unit is a great source of and resource that we could draw on for those sorts of discussions. But as I say, on the science side, there weren't very many disagreements, but the others might have other opinions.
Yeah, I mean, you would imagine that on hundreds of co-authors, you're going to find everything, and particularly, co-authors from all ends of the world. I think that I must say that from, like, kudos to the last IPCC, where we actually got training on how to manage groups and how to be fair and how to manage the natural human condition of people being some very outspoken, other less. So really trying to kind of bring, that diversity of knowledge that it's held within the group, to excel. And so, yeah, I mean, my chapter had a problem. We were on disagreement with one of the co-authors, and we had to take a cooling off break multiple times, and that's part of managing humans. So there's nothing about science or anything about related to weird that it doesn't happen in our daily lives. So, but again, I think that IPCC made an effort to actually provide us some sessions, training sessions, just to help us to kind of cope with all these. When the hundreds and thousands of review comments come in, at some point in the process, we get what we call the review editors. And the review editors are a key person to make sure that, number one, we're doing a really fair process at responding and addressing all those thousands of comments that you would rather not do because there's so many. And most importantly, when there is a conflict, like that co-authors do not agree with the reviewers and we don't know how to solve it, then that review editor becomes a very important person in managing that process. So just to say, there's all these lines and processes and checks and balances that try to manage the best possible of the human condition, of humans involved in this process, to really do the best job for a fair and open, comprehensive, transparent assessment.
Can I just add, Heidi? So
Yeah,
in
sure.
our chapter, we, following on from what Pep said, we did have a survey at the end of every meeting, actually, to ensure that everyone, like, this is people from across different cultures and languages, that everyone felt that they understood what was going on and that their points were being heard. And I think that was really good practice. So, something I'd recommend everywhere, really.
Yeah, I love the people skills as well as technical skills when you're being involved. Tilo, did you have anything you wanted to add before we move on?
We haven't gone through that process yet.
You've got that to look forward to.
Yes, definitely. And I think, as Pep said and Pandora, the amount of reviewers' comments to be expected, yeah, it's really helping to improve the report, but it's a big process to manage as well.
Yes, well, good luck for your first round. Okay, so we'll move on. Another one from the audience. In your opinions, what is the importance of overshoot trajectories in IPCC assessment, given we are likely to overshoot 1.5 degrees Celsius within the next few decades?
I'll quickly point out that we thought it was so important, we gave it a chapter. So I might hand over to Tilo, perhaps.
Yes, and that's the case again for the upcoming IPCC report. Overshoots will be explicitly covered and assessed, and the new set of CMIP 7 scenarios also focus a lot more on overshoots. So there's a total of 7 scenarios, And yeah, a large number of them include overshoot behaviors as well. So yeah, a much stronger focus.
Yeah, great. Okay, that was a really good comprehensive answer. Moving on to the next one. What changes do you expect in AR7 scenarios and projections that will make them more decision useful for climate risk assessments and disclosures?
But you, Tilo, it's your chapter.
So that's a good question. I guess there is stronger emphasis on plausible policy relevant futures. I think there will be a clearer separation between assessment of near-term and long-term, multi-decadal to century scale outcomes. Scenarios are also being run for a lot longer. That's the so-called scenario extensions. You might think if you run a model until 2500, that's not policy relevant anymore, but actually it really matters. There are some really slow processes in the climate system. So the decisions that we make right now have really large impacts on those very long time scales as well. So it's important that we understand what happens at a 200, 300, 400 year time scale or even longer as well. There is stronger emphasis on so-called emissions-driven simulations. So these are simulations that include a fully interactive carbon cycle. So instead of prescribing CO2 concentrations, these models use emissions at inputs and then work out what the resulting CO2 concentrations are depending on what the land and oceans are doing. So this is a lot more policy relevant. So yes, there is a stronger shift towards being more usable from a policy point of view.
Tilo, Pep or Pandora, did you want to add anything there or?
No.
No?
Thanks.
Okay, great. Sean, let's chuck one in here for you. What is the best part of your role? Why is it so important to have Australian authors as part of the process? I think you're on mute.
Apologies.
No, you're right.
Yeah. I think the best part of the role is sort of sitting behind that Australian nameplate in the IPCC plenaries, knowing that Australian scientific community makes such a really strong contribution to the IPCC. And on the day-to-days of my role can sometimes just be, coordinating nominations and making sure authors have grant support for the direct costs, sort of contribute to some of the direct costs of participating. So sometimes there's a fair bit of admin, but then there's also some quite sort of complex stuff of, what's the new science coming out? Why is it important for policy, and trying to unpack that. I think why Australian authors being involved, I think, Tilo sort of has mentioned some of our modelling capacity and assessments, and it's one of the most unique in the Southern Hemisphere. So contributing that to the global picture and effort and models is really important. But also just the Australian realities and what we're seeing here that's reflected in the assessments is really important. We've got a whole continent and ocean surrounding us, so getting that science in is really important. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. You were saying as well that we have quite a strong representation kind of comparably.
Yeah, I think in this cycle we're pretty much probably the second highest represented country. It's always a little bit difficult because people have dual citizenships and those sorts of things, but I think probably the US leads, and then there's countries like ourselves and UK, China, that also have strong representation.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Okay, here's an interesting one. What role do you think AI will start to have in the generation of IPCC reports?
I'd love to start, but I might hand over to someone who's in the current one after. So in my work, certainly as a research scientist, starting to use a lot of the tools like searching for literature, there's really great tools available now. And in IPCC, we did get really great training on how to be very objective on collecting all the literature and making sure you didn't have bias in how you actually sourced all your literature to assess. So I see really great use for those sorts of tools. And I was really curious to just see, Thilo, what the role of AI is now in and if you've had training in this, and you know, are you going to use it for summaries or just, you know, searching out all the different literature you could possibly find? Yeah, really interested.
Yeah, thanks, Pandora. Well, there is no question that AI will play an increasing role in that part of science as well, and it can be really useful. It can potentially save a lot of time, but just to be very sure that and very clear about this, the core assessment is done by humans. So it's not it's the scientists that are involved in the IPCC. And there is clear guidance from the IPCC as well on what AI can be used for and what it cannot be used for. So authors should not use AI for writing assessment text. They should not use AI for drawing scientific conclusions, creating summaries, or developing figures. So that's done by the scientists. And as you suggested, there is training on the use of AI. There is a whole document on the use of AI. I think the IPCC is going to already has hired an AI officer, recognizing that we need more clarification around what role AI plays in this whole process. We also need to make sure that when we use AI for tasks that it is suitable for, that we disclose it, that we use a closed system, so it's not feeding back into the training of AI. It could potentially help with data processing, so generating the code, not the data. But everything needs to be transparent and everything needs to be declared. So yeah, again, it's on top of everything else we need to be aware of. This is just another layer.
Yeah, thanks, Thilo, and thanks, Pandora. Yeah, the training would have been super interesting. Did anyone want to add anything? Because I think it might be time to wrap things up. Any last thoughts, feedback?
Heidi, I was just going to jump in and say that
please do.
IPCC has run a workshop recently on the use of AI, and they should come out with a report soon. So, so there was a bit of a process, and it's a strong focus for the IPCC this cycle. So there should be some report and guidance coming out. And as Thilo said, there's an AI officer being recruited, as I understand, in one of the TSUs.
Yeah, thanks for that, Sean. Good to know what's happening in the space. Okay, so I want to give, all our speakers, our panel members, a big thank you for sharing such fantastic insights and their expert views on all things IPCC, including where some of the gaps are and what's being done to address them. I want to thank all of you, the audience, for your active participation and engagement. Thank you for supporting the Climate Systems Hub. We really hope you've taken something away from today, learnings, connections with others in this space, or a wish to stay involved in the discussions around the IPCC assessment. We've got another great webinar lined up next month, so please subscribe to our newsletter at the bottom of the Climate Systems Hub homepage that QR code will take you to, and keep an eye on your inbox for more information about what's coming up. And yes, spread the word to anyone working in the climate science or adaptation space. As I mentioned, a link to the recording will be sent out to those who registered. The recording will be made available on the Climate Systems Hub website. You'll find a feedback form there too. We'd love to hear what you thought of this session. Thanks again to our presenters and for others who've been active behind the scenes to make today happen. Yeah, much appreciated. Okay, everyone, we will see you next time.